How are you guys doing this morning, guys? I'm super excited to be here. Noah is amazing and incredible. You guys are so blessed to have him and Matthew just leading your guys' ministry and stuff. In the short amount of time I've known him and the longer amount of time I've known Matthew, they're just two incredible individuals. But like Noah said, you guys, my name is Peter. There we are. Woo! Sound. Thank God for technology. Like Noah said, you guys, my name is Peter. I'm from a church out in Queen-Tucky, Arizona, aka Queen Creek, called Rock Point Church. I am the intern for the high school ministry out there, so it's like the same thing Noah does, just with the high schoolers out at the church out there. If you guys are ever out that way and you see me, please say hi. And Nolan and me have actually met before. Where's he at? He's in the booth back there. So this is our second time meeting up with him, and I'm really excited about that. So I figured I would share with you guys just a little bit about myself before we get started today. I actually had some pictures I sent over to show you in the Google Drive, but as we all know, Google is sometimes unreliable. But then I thought to myself, I said, I got these pictures in here, and I think you guys are close enough to where you might be able to see them. So the first one is this. You guys, back in April of this year, I got married to this amazing girl named Michelle. She is now my wife. We're coming up on 1 year. Hospital, so she's a children's cancer nurse, which that is just very near and dear to her, helping out the kids who are suffering from cancer, and it's something that she loves to do, and I'm super proud of her for doing. When me and Michelle got married, I became an adoptive father of this wretched beast right here. Her name is Bagheera. She is Michelle's cat, and she loves Michelle a ton. You have 8 cats. That's a lot. I have trouble with just one. She's awesome with Michelle. She loves her. She snuggles with her, sleeps with her. But with me, she's just like the worst. She bites me. She hits me. She abuses me. And it's just crazy. At night when I go to bed, sometimes my feet stick out like from the end of the covers. She will come up from underneath the bed and like sink her claws into my toes and bite them. So then I end up sleeping in like the fetal position, and it's just I always got to make sure the blanket's covering my feet. But when me and Michelle got married, we got one more animal since we don't have any kids or anything yet, and he is actually a Holland Lop bunny. His name is Fluffy. Okay. He is awesome. He is like my favorite. I never ever knew what it would be like to have a bunny, and he has just like exceeded all the expectations I had. Like he's super friendly. He's awesome, and I love him. It's almost like having a little puppy that's like this big, except he can jump way higher because he's a rabbit, and he just like soars through the air. Once he gets going and running around, it's cool. But one cool fact about bunnies is we saw him do this thing one day where he almost like jumped up and he kicked his feet out to the side of him, and it was almost like a double heel click. I know you guys know what that is. And I was like, what on earth did he just do? Like, he looked like he was going to snap his spine. Like, something's wrong with him. This has to be unnatural. So we Googled up, like, what is it when bunnies do this? And it came out that rabbits express their most joy when they do this, like, jumping and kicking thing. So it's like the height of the joy they can experience. So then this light bulb went off in my head, and it was like, that's where they got the phrase jump for joy from. I was like, it came from freaking rabbits, dude. Like, who knew? So, anyways, though, you guys, before we get started today and we jump into our message, would you guys pray with me real quick? Lord, we just thank you so much that we all made it here safely today, and we know it's not by accident that any person is in this room, Lord. We know that it is by your design, God. And I just pray that you would speak through me today, that it wouldn't be my words, but it would be your words, God, and that it would just connect with the hearts of these students, Lord. I just pray that you would be with us as we go from here later today, too, Lord. We ask all this in your holy name. Amen. All right, you guys. So you have been in a series the last couple of weeks called The Grind, and it's called Persevering in a Tough World. But today is actually the last week of that series. We're going to be closing it out today. And to start things off, the topic of today's message is going to be something that if you haven't experienced it yet, you are bound to experience it at some point or another in your life. Thank you so much. That is like 9 times better. I love you. It is the topic of peer pressure, you guys. How many of you guys have experienced peer pressure or gone through something? How many of you guys, those of you not raising your hands, you're probably like the pressurers, okay? So this will really speak to you. No, you guys, but basically peer pressure, man. Like, once again, just how many of you guys have ever been in a situation where your peers have pressured you to do something that you felt was wrong or you felt convicted about? I know I've been there just a ton of of times. Before we head further into this thing today, I started thinking to myself as we were talking about the topic of peer pressure, and I was preparing this week, and I was like, how do we best go about defining peer pressure? So I did the logical thing that anybody would do, and I went and opened up this old Merriam-Webster dictionary. How many of you guys have heard of the Merriam-Webster dictionary? Okay, I see only girls, because guys are like, what's a dictionary? Okay, they don't even know. But the definition of peer pressure in the Merriam-Webster dictionary is this. It says, a feeling that one must do the same things as other people of one's age or social group in order to be liked or respected by them. I'm going to say that one more time. It's a feeling that one must do the same thing as other people of one's age or social group in order to be liked or respected by them. So you do things to fit in, to feel accepted, okay? If that definition didn't connect, it's okay, because in 2021 I'm coming out with my own dictionary called the Peter Soosai Dictionary, and this is the definition for it, okay? It is decisions, actions, and behaviors based off the influence of others. So decisions, actions, behaviors, I should probably throw adventures in there too, as you're about to hear, based off the influence of others, okay? So I want to talk for just a second about what are the ways that people peer pressure us a lot of the time, just to give you a couple examples. And I think it starts off with things like the TV shows that we watch, the movies that we watch. Dude, everyone's going to see this movie, even though it's rated R. We're just going to sneak in and go see it. Nobody will ever know. Everybody's watching this TV show. Everybody's listening to this kind of music, okay? Everybody's using this type of language as they talk, or everybody is going to these events or doing these things. So as I thought about this weekend and peer pressure, I kind of dialed back my memory to a really long time ago. So we're about to take a journey back, and I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but I wasn't much older than you guys at the time. I was in 9th grade, but we are taking a journey back to 2005. How old were most of you guys? See, that's why, I didn't want to say it, okay? Some of you maybe didn't exist back then. But yeah, this was back in 2005. I know I'm really old. But this is a story about a time that I actually overcame peer pressure, okay? And don't give me a gold star or a pat on the back, because all the while I was in grade school, there's probably only like once or twice I overcame peer pressure, and this was one of them, okay? So this story takes place at Higley High School in 9th grade. How many of you guys are going to Higley in a couple years? Anybody? I hope not. Amen, okay? Because I don't think it's gotten much better. It doesn't look like anybody, so I'll say praise God for that. But my brother, he's only he's like 16 months older than me. He's a year and a half older than me, so while I was in 9th grade, he was in 10th grade. And it was coming to the end of the school year, so it was kind of hot outside, and everyone's having lunch inside, and I would sit at a table with him and a bunch of his friends, and his friend Dan, he gets this idea one day. He's like, hey guys, we're going to go on this adventure after school. You guys can crash out at my place. It's Friday night. It's going to be epic, okay? I found this like chain link fence, barbed wire, caution tape, no trespassing compound out by this dirt field, okay? It's kind of close to over where Cosmo Park is. You guys will know what I'm talking about in a minute. And he's like, we need to go exploring in this place. And everyone's like, yeah, this sounds like a brilliant idea. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, you just said barbed wire, chain link fence, no trespassing sign, and caution tape. I was like, that just sounds like we're all going to jail, dude. I was like, I'm too young to go to jail. I'm going to be like one of the best entrepreneurs one day. I don't have time to sit in jail for the rest of my life. You guys can go. And they all looked at me and were like, are you seriously not going to go, dude? I was like, this just sounds like a terrible idea. I was like, I don't think we should be like breaking into this place that's all, you know, sectioned off. It's got to be broken off for a reason. It's either dangerous or just something, or they're hiding aliens down there. I don't even know, okay? And they sat there and they were like, yeah, but dude, afterwards we're going to go see a movie at Harkins, and after that we're going to crash at Dan's house and play video games and hang out. And they were like, you won't be invited. Like, if you don't come with us, well, we probably can't invite you to the next time that we go do something fun. Like, if we know you can't hang with us during this, you probably can't hang with us in the future. And honestly, I was just like, well, that sounds fun and cool, but I was like, I can't do this. This just sounds like not good news. And so at the end of the day, they tried to pressure me one more time into going with them, and I didn't end up going. I said no, and my brother was like, well, dude, you are walking home by yourself today, because he was in 10th grade and he drove and I didn't yet. So I took the long 3.5-mile journey home by myself with my backpack and my textbooks in it that day, because my English and history teacher always made us take our textbooks home. It was terrible. but that's a story for another time. About forgiveness. No. So my brother, I walk home and I went home. It's Friday night. I'm just kicking it at home. And my brother and his friends go off on this journey, okay, to go to this little compound place. And apparently when they got there, they said that there were still workers there because it was about 5 p.m. and the day wasn't over yet. And so they're like, well, how are we going to get into this thing? We didn't come all the way out here to just turn around and go back. So they're like, I know, we'll sneak in through the back, okay, and the workers won't see us. And I don't know how they did this. Like maybe it's because they were the height of hobbits at the time and the workers were taller and they just kind of like snuck in like Frodo and Sam or something. And they end up going into this thing and it's all boarded off. So I'll tell you what this place was, okay? It was a water pumping facility. If you guys have ever been to Topgolf at Gilbert, okay? When you look out to the very back where the netting is and over to the left, you will see through the netting this little concrete compound. That's what this thing is, okay? So next time you're there, look out and you'll be like, oh, that was the thing from Peter's story. Okay, but this was long before Topgolf and stuff was there, so it was just like an empty dirt field. But they get there and it's a water pumping facility that pumps water off of the 202 and out of the road in the park down through sewage pipes. This thing is 5 stories deep. It goes into the ground. So it's like closer to hell than hopefully any of us will ever be. My brother and his friends go in there and you guys are probably wondering, you're like, how does he know this thing's a water pumping facility? He's smart. No, I just have a brother who makes stupid decisions, okay? Maybe you can relate. My brother and his friends, they make their way in there and as they're traveling down this thing and they're going down inside of it, there's a bunch of stairwells and they're hopping over the side of the stair rails because all of the stairs were boarded off. Okay, I get this brilliant idea. They see this black, almost like bungee cord rope thing hanging kind of around the stair thing, and they had no idea how deep this facility went. And they get this brilliant idea. They're like, hey, why don't we just like Tarzan shimmy down the rope and go farther into the abyss? And like, they all seem to think this was a great idea. Now, mind you, like they've exerted a ton of energy climbing over the wall, getting past the chain link fence and the people working there who are closing up for the day. And then on top of that, they're heading down these stairs, and now they're climbing down this bungee cord thing. And they get to the bottom of this like dark black abyss. And mind you, this was back in the day of the Nokia cell phone, flip phone, okay? So you didn't have a big, huge, bright light on your phone like how the iPhones and Androids have nowadays, but you just had this barely dim light glow thing, and it was literally like Gandalf leading them through the mines of Moria, okay? If you've ever seen Lord of the Rings, I love Lord of the Rings. I geek out to them all the time. And they make their way down to the bottom of this thing, and they keep going and wondering how much farther it is, and they're just like, oh, well, we'll just keep going down farther and farther. Well, they get to the bottom of this thing, and they see this big, huge sewer opening, like this Ninja Turtle type thing, and someone's like, yeah, we need to go and find where it ends, the other side of it, and then one of them had the sense to be like, no, this is how every single horror movie starts, so we should probably turn around and go back. So they decide to start heading back up, but they run into the problem that, like I told you, all the stairwells were boarded off, so the only way back out of this thing was to climb back up the railing, over the railings, or back up the bungee cord. And by this time, they had all just exerted way too much energy, so they almost ended up being stuck down there. Luckily, 2 of them played football, so they just started like total guy thing, man, like not even using their brains. They started running like shoulder and arm and head first into the wooden boards, hoping that they would snap or kind of break so that they could make their way over them and make their way back up the stairwell. Well, my brother was probably like the leanest of all of them. He was the only one who didn't play football. He was a little more gangly, kind of like Gollum in Lord of the Rings. My 3rd reference now. I'm on a roll. And he like makes his way back up ahead of all of them, and they're all kind of helping each other and going along because they're all little like football players, a little bit bigger. And my brother gets out of the compound. He's like, oh, dude, fresh air, finally. And over the wall in front of the compound, okay, there was another group of kids who were supposed to meet them there to come and join in this whole adventure with them. And they never showed up. And so my brother starts climbing the wall and trying to get up on it, and another body pops up right in front of the wall, and it's got a huge bright flashlight, and it's sitting there shining it into his face, and he's like, dude, what the heck, man? He's like, stop shining the flashlight. You're going to draw attention to us, or somebody's going to see you. And the voice on the other end of this thing was like, do you know who this is? And he was like, no, I know you're shining a light in my face, though. And the voice on the other end was like, this is Gilbert PD. And he was like, oh, no. I'm not going to tell you what he really said because I can't say it in church, okay? And the cop was like, oh, no is right. He's like, how many more of there are you? And he's like, well, there's 3 more of us. And he's like, well, you need to go and get them now. So he walks back to where the stairs are as the other guys are coming up. And he's like, hey, guys. He's like, cops. And they're like, oh no, and he's like, oh no is right. So the cop ends up helping them all get back over the wall, okay? And they end up going there, and when my brother came back up over the wall, he said there was 6 squad cars there and an ambulance, okay? So what had been happening was in the weeks prior to this, there had been a group of kids that went and were vandalizing this facility while it was being built, and they had done a whole bunch of damage to the place. And so the cops thought, they were like, the people who did this before will probably return to the scene of the crime. And so my brother and his friends didn't do anything other than break a couple wooden boards, but they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, so the cops were waiting for them, and they tried to pin this whole thing on them. So my brother and his friends are sitting there, and I'm sitting at home on the ancient social media platform of MySpace, okay, listening to some tunes on a Friday night. My mom had gotten Barro's Pizza, and I was just like, yeah, dude, like, I missed out on the adventure, but tonight's going pretty well so far. And of course, like, the landline phone that everybody used to have is by the computer, and the phone starts ringing. And so I look at the phone and I answer it, and I'm like, hello? And the voice on the other end is like, is your mother or father home? And I'm like, who's this? And he's like, this is Gilbert PD. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, oh no. And he's like, oh no is right. And so I go and I get my mom, and I'm like, hey, mom, I'm like, Gilbert PD's on the phone. And she's like, what? Oh no! I'm like, oh no's right, okay? And so I go with my parents, and you guys are probably wondering at this point, you're like, how does he know what this place looks like and all that stuff when he wasn't there? Well, I went with my mom in the car to go and pick up my brother, and we show up, and my brother and all his friends are sitting in a little circle, handcuffed, sitting on the ground, and my mom and all the other parents start showing up, and they're extremely angry. So my brother and his friends ended up actually having a court case for this. They all had to go to and plead their case, and they tried to plead not guilty. The judge ended up giving them all classes to go to in community service, and they had some fines they had to pay. I think he wanted to make an example of them. He knew they didn't really do any damage. But my brother ended up going to this class called a diversion class, and I was like, what's a diversion class? He's like, it's supposed to divert you from being a criminal, but apparently it worked because he's like an outstanding citizen now. He's a great guy. But once they all got ungrounded and stuff, the point of this whole thing was they came back to me later and they were like, dude, we should have listened to you, man. Like, the consequences of what we went and did, it just, like, did not add up to the fun of the adventure that we had. And not to be like, oh, I was so great or whatever, but I stuck to my convictions. Like, this just seems like a bad idea. And all of them at the end of it were like, man, we should have listened to you. Like, you were right. But I want to talk about these. There's 3 ways that I think typically that we end up giving into peer pressure. There's 3 reasons why that we do it, okay, most of the time. And the first one is this. It's that everybody else is doing it, okay? We sit there and we don't want to be the ones left out. It's super uncomfortable to be the only person who's excluded from the circle, who's not a part of what's happening, because everyone looks at you like you're indifferently. So that's one of the reasons that we give into peer pressure. And the second one is this. It's that we seek other people's approval. We always are looking to fit in. We want to be fitting in with the people that we think are cool, or the friends that we have. We don't want them to be put on a pedestal above us, and we don't want them to think less of us. So we're constantly doing things and making decisions to seek the approval of others. And the third one is this, okay? It's we feel like we have more to lose by holding out than giving in. So basically it's like what's the worst that could happen? Like, what do I really have to lose from this? In their situation, it was being handcuffed on a Friday night and going to a court case and all this other stuff with it. So they kind of had that one wrong. But yeah, those are typically the 3 reasons that we end up giving into peer pressure, and that we usually end up doing things that we typically regret in the end. But before we dive into the story today in Scripture that I want to take a look at, I want to look over our big idea for the day, and it's this. As you guys are going to see in this story, okay? And it's, when the world wants you to conform to the situation, let your faith transform the situation. Okay? I'm going to say that one more time. It's, when the world wants you to conform to the situation, let your faith transform the situation. So the story that we're going to look at in Scripture today is in the book of Daniel, as you guys have been saying, or as you guys have been going through the last couple of weeks. And this story actually doesn't revolve around Daniel himself, okay? It revolves around his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You guys might have heard this story. It's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the fiery furnace. How many of you guys have heard this story before? A couple of you? Okay. How many of you guys have seen the VeggieTales version of this movie, okay? Yeah, with the chocolate bunny, okay? They call him if I accidentally call one of them Rack Shack Benny or King Nebby, okay, that's totally why, because I've seen that VeggieTales movie. It was the first one that came out. I'm not going to tell you what year because it'll laugh at me even more. But you guys, let me give you some background context around this story, okay? And it's this, that the people of Israel at the time, the Jews in Israel, King Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonian Empire, he came into Jerusalem. He has completely destroyed the walls of Jerusalem, okay? He has gone and desecrated the temple, okay? The holy place where they would go and worship. And all of the Jewish people have been hauled off to Babylon in the Babylonian captivity in chains. And they've been locked out of their own place. They're not in Kansas anymore, Toto, okay? They're in the big city now, the crazy, fabulous land of Oz, okay? So they're in a foreign land with a foreign ruler, and they are captives in this city. And somehow Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have gotten some favor from King Nebuchadnezzar. And we don't know exactly where Daniel is, but they've all been promoted to positions of status inside the province of Babylon. So they all have like a position, a job to do. So they've risen kind of above. But a lot of times this comes at the cost of their faith and their beliefs, which they never ever are willing to sacrifice. They're always standing up for what's right. And so in this current story, like I said, we don't know where Daniel is. He's probably on official Babylonian business, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are all there. And King Nebuchadnezzar ends up building this golden statue, okay? It's 90 feet high by 9 feet wide. Can you guys stop and picture how much gold that is for a second? 90 feet high by 9 feet wide. If King Nebuchadnezzar just turned that into a jewelry store, you would have girls who got engaged not saying, oh, he went to Jared's. They'd be like, oh, he went to Nebi's, okay? 24 karat gold. It's an insane amount of gold. But he builds his statue and he makes a decree that everybody at the sound of the music, the trumpets, lyres, and harps playing, has to bow down and worship this image of gold. And if they don't, they will be thrown into a blazing furnace, okay? So they have a dedication ceremony for this golden idol statue that Nebuchadnezzar wants them to worship. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't go. They're like, this goes against our beliefs. This goes against the God of heaven. We can't worship this idol, okay? And so they don't do it. And the astrologers at the time go and rat him out. They tell Nebuchadnezzar that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refuse to worship the God, the image that you've put up. And they weren't there at the dedication ceremony. So King Nebuchadnezzar is really, really upset, okay? And we're going to dive in Daniel chapter 3, verse 13. This is right before Nebuchadnezzar summons Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Do you guys do Bibles, Noah? Or...
It's on their phones. Or we have
it. Okay, cool. I'll give you guys just like 5 seconds to get there. It's Daniel chapter 3, verse 13 is where we're going to jump in, okay? So I'm going to start in, and you guys can follow along if you want. Otherwise, I think it'll be up on the screen. Here we go. Nebuchadnezzar is about to summon Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It says, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. So Nebuchadnezzar tells them, he says, listen up, boys, you've got one more chance at this thing. You can either drop, give in to the peer pressure, and you can worship the idol I have, or it's into the fire with you, okay? This is life or death for them, basically. So it says, he's going to throw them immediately into the blazing furnace. It says, then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. So Nebuchadnezzar is extremely ticked off now. He's mad that they've told him, like, hey, you can throw us into the fire, but no matter what, like, we're not going to worship the image that you have. And they go as far to tell him, they say, the God that we worship is able to save us. But basically, even if he doesn't, he's still worthy to be praised, okay? But that just shows you where their hope and their faith was in God, that he would rescue them from it. But even if he didn't, he was still worthy to be praised, okay? So Nebuchadnezzar does what any powerful ticked-off king does, okay? He asks that the fire be heated 7 times hotter. So if you guys imagine, like, your oven when you're throwing in your pizza bites or, like, chicken nuggets, the dinosaur ones that I know you all love. You put the oven to, like, 450 degrees or so.
It's always 450.
always 450. See, he knows his things. He can read Fahrenheit. Imagine having that cranked up 7 times hotter than that. Like when you open the oven, you feel a blast of heat. But if you were to turn the oven up even louder, or hotter, I should say, that's some pretty extreme heat we're dealing with. So Nebuchadnezzar must have been really angry. And what he ends up doing is he has the strongest soldiers in his army bind them with ropes so they can't go anywhere. And these guys at the culture of the time, they have like turbans on, robes on, and trousers on. So these are extremely flammable things, okay? And he has them start walking them up the ramp to throw them into the thing. And it says in the Bible, in the passages of Scripture, that the heat from the fire was so hot, okay, that when the soldiers were taking them up, they died instantly, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell into the fire. Okay, so the soldiers, the strongest ones in his army, taking him up, ended up dying too, just to prove the point that they should go into the fire, okay? We're going to pick it up in verse 24 now, Daniel chapter 3. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have just fallen into the fire. The deed has been done, okay? Here we go. It says, Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, Certainly, your majesty. He said, Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th one looks like a son of God. Pause real quick. In the Old Testament, you guys, I don't know if you knew this or not, but Jesus shows up a ton of times, okay? He doesn't show up in his earthly, like, fleshy-looking self like he does in the gospel stories, but they call him the angel of the Lord, and he shows up in his pre-incarnate glory and just, like, majesty, okay? And he just, like, wrecks things on the scene so many times, and this is definitely one of those instances where Jesus showed up in the fire with them, and they end up not even getting scorched by the flames like we're going to see, okay? And it says, Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way than the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So you guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they walk out of the fiery furnace unharmed, unscathed, because Jesus was with them. How often when you guys go through peer pressure and you put resistance up against it, does the fire get turned up 7 times hotter? The people trying to pressure you into something, they become more aggressive, more relentless. And these guys, they held their ground through that. The big idea I want to look at one more time today, as we see the end of it, is when the world wants you to conform to this situation, let your faith transform the situation. Like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had so much to lose in this situation. They were in a foreign land, their lives were on the line, and everybody else was doing this. Think of how many other people who came from Israel probably gave into this thing. They had the whole mindset, like, my home has been destroyed. I'm not even in the land that I came from. I got a job here working for the king, and all I have to do is bow down to this thing. Like, where's God? We're in this other place, in this foreign city, and we kind of got left here, and Jerusalem has been destroyed. They had every single reason to give into the pressure of this thing. They had every single reason to say, you know what? I'm going to save my own skin this time and do something good for myself. But they didn't. They stood up for what they believed in, and they stood up for their convictions. So you guys, those 3 reasons that we talked about earlier and we looked at that were the most common reasons that we end up giving into peer pressure. I want to look at those one more time, and I want to talk to you guys about God's truth surrounding those 3 things. We should have a slide for them, I think. We can put that up if we want. But the first one was this. It was that everybody else is doing it. Like we said, everyone around Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was giving into this thing. They gave into the pressure of the king's command, even though, other people could have been captives there too who worshipped other gods and stuff. And they all gave into it, okay? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood their ground. They didn't care what everybody else was doing, but they cared about their morals and their convictions. That's a good song. If you guys look at the story of the gospel too, Jesus is rarely doing what other people are doing, okay? For example, when you look at the week of Passover, okay, Jesus is there and people are selling stuff inside of the temple, which is not okay, and the Pharisees of the religious leaders of the law at the time are letting this thing happen and go on. And Jesus is the only one to go in there and start flipping tables and cleaning house. For instance, another example, when the adulterous woman is about to be stoned and everybody in the community is there and wants to stone her, Jesus is the only one to say, hey, he who is without sin, cast the first stone. Like, if you're blameless too, then go ahead, but if you're not, then don't even throw the first stone at her. Another good example is this. The people who were outcast at that time, the lepers and then the beggars and the lame and the sick, they were all put out and people didn't care about them. They treated them poorly. They overlooked them. Jesus was the only one to go after them and say, hey, I love you, I care about you, and do something good for them. So everything that Jesus does is not always what everybody else is doing. In fact, most of the time it's completely countercultural to what the world is doing. Let's take a look at the second one again. It says, we seek other people's approval and acceptance, okay? Another thing, too, is this. The king would have given them all the acceptance. He would have promoted them even further and higher and kept going with them. They could have made a name for themselves in the Babylonian Empire if they wanted other people's acceptance, but they knew that God had already accepted them, that the God they believed in had already approved of them and would approve more of them for standing up for their beliefs instead of abandoning them. And so often that's the thing with us. We seek other people's approvals, and in the case of God himself, you guys, God sent his son to die for us, to forgive us of our sins so we could be accepted by him, so that God, no matter what we do wrong in this life, he can accept us and he can welcome us into his family. We have that approval from God. God thought about us long before we ever thought about him, and he put a plan into place to save us and rescue us from our own sin, like long before we ever thought of him. The last one is this again. We have more to lose by holding out than giving in. Okay, Jesus says in Matthew 16:26, he said, what good is it to gain the world but lose your soul? Think about it. So many times when we're faced with peer pressure and the decisions of peer pressure, it's such a temporary thing. This life is temporary. The situations you go through are temporary. The things that people like today that you give up your beliefs and your convictions for are not even going to be cool tomorrow or the next day. So we need to put our faith in Jesus and understand that what he's promised us and what he's given us is eternity, you guys. It goes so much further than anything else that this life is going to last for. To give you guys a really good example, there's this pastor, Francis Chan, and he always gives this analogy with this rope, and he puts a little black piece of tape on the end of the rope, and he says, this is this life, and like the rope goes like 30 feet, it's never ending, and he says, that's eternity, and we fuss and fret so much over this little tiny speck of time when God has promised us eternity for everybody who believes in him. So those are just a couple things there, and the truth of that, before we close today, you guys, I want to challenge you with one thing this week before you go out, okay? I feel like it's too much to ask you to say, hey, every single thing that you've been pressured into or that you are being peer pressured into out there in the world, say no to it or give it up. But I want to ask you guys and challenge you with this. What is one thing, just one thing you could start with this week, whether it's TV shows you watch or music you listen to or the choice of words that you use with your friends or the way you treat other people because of how you see they are treated, okay? What is one thing you can start by saying no to? You can start by standing up for what you know to be right this week, okay? I want you to take just a couple seconds and think about it. Just ask God, pray to him really quick, and just ask him, say, God, put this on my heart really quick. Whatever that one thing is you want me to start with this week. Let's take a moment and figure out what that looks like. All right, you guys, so hopefully you have that one thing. If not, like I said, I really hope and I'm believing that God is going to bring that to you, into mind, into your heart as you go from here today. But like I said, you guys, you're going to see that when you say no to the things that you just know deep down are not right and are not okay, God is going to meet you in that moment. He's going to empower you in that moment. And maybe the end result of it is possibly some pushback. Like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had a lot that seemed like they were going through at the time. The pressure was on for them. The pressure might be on for you, but the biggest thing to remember is that Jesus is with you. He was with them through the fire, through the whole entire ordeal. He never left them or abandoned them, and he'll never leave you guys or abandon you. You guys, when we let peer pressure and stuff take over our lives, especially as Christians, as believers, like God has made us in his image and he wants us to be an example of him. Okay, he wants us to be a shining light, like a city on a hill for him. And so often when we give into the things of this world, like, what's the best way to put it? Oh, here we go, I got it. The thing that ends up happening is that our lives begin to take the place of knowing Jesus instead of being the result of knowing him and knowing him well. And that's just, it becomes such a light to other people. You guys look back at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The king's heart was completely changed and transformed. He said, hey, no more other gods. He said, it's going to be the God that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego worship. Like, look at these guys. That's incredible. It moved his heart, and it changed an entire nation at that time, which is absolutely incredible. So, you guys, like I said, that one thing, just work on it this week. Take a baby step towards it and see where God meets you in that, okay? We're going to pray really quick, and then Noah's going to come back up and dismiss you.